In the face of ICC arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the statements from Israel's defenders are becoming ever more bizarre. Natasha Hausdorff is legal director of UK Lawyers for Israel.
These allegations are essentially the modern blood libel. The ancient blood libel accused Jews of killing Christian children for their blood. The modern one accuses Jewish soldiers, Israelis, of killing Palestinian children. They are equally as unfounded. And where a modern blood libel forms the basis of arrest warrants against Jewish leaders, and this is, of course, at the expense of real situations of war crimes that the court has refrained from investigating, then yes, the overriding impression of that, and this is the court as a whole that has been called anti-Semitic on that basis, is that must be the reasoning and the motivation in order for this court to seek to rehabilitate itself in the public arena.
So that idea that the claim that Israel are killing children in Gaza is a modern blood libel. Now, I don't know what world she thinks she's speaking in, right? Because we've seen the numbers from all of these reputable organizations, from the UN, from Save the Children, who are telling us that thousands and thousands of children have been killed, right? And tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands are being malnutrition or suffering from malnutrition because Israel isn't allowing aid in there. But we've also seen the images. Something that is really, I mean, this obviously has happened in wars before. People always talk about sort of the Vietnam War, how there were pictures of children suffering, victim of bomb attacks, and how that sort of shifted public opinion. But now it's like that times 100, right? Because we are seeing really graphic images of children being killed day after day after day after day. And then you still have someone from the Israeli side who thinks they can sort of go on the radio and suggest that the fact that Israel are killing children is being made up, right? This is just an old myth, a racist canard, right? It's bizarre. But this stuff isn't just limited to extremist lawyers on LBC. I'm sure she'd deny being an extremist, but it sounded pretty extreme to me. Meanwhile, the editorial board at the Washington Post are also sort of lashing out at the ICC in a really bizarre way. So it says opinion, but this isn't by an opinion writer, it's by the editorial board of the Washington Post. The International Criminal Court is not the venue to hold Israel to account. They say the ICC is needed to help resolve war crimes in Russia, Sudan, Myanmar. Targeting Israel makes that harder. Now, this idea that the ICC, I mean, this has long been a criticism of the ICC by countries in the global south, which is they say the ICC only prosecutes, I mean, for a long time, it only prosecutes countries in Africa or leaders in Africa. And then after that, it only prosecutes leaders who are not allies of the West. And now, after assembling lots of very, very strong evidence, the ICC, which has a very high threshold for these types of things, has put out an arrest warrant for Israel. And then you literally have completely shamelessly the Washington Post, their editorial board, saying, the International Criminal Court isn't for our friends. No. The International Criminal Court is for our enemies. And if we start prosecuting our friends, then it's going to make it even harder to prosecute our enemies. Now, I mean, most people would read that. I think most people think that if it prosecutes your friends as well as your enemies, it looks a little bit more legitimate. But for the editorial board at the Washington Post, no, the opposite is the case. It's only a legitimate body if it prosecutes people that we already didn't like. Now, let's look at the argument they make. So they say, the arrest orders undermine the ICC's credibility and give credence to accusations of hypocrisy and selective prosecution. The ICC is putting the elected leaders of a democratic country with its own independent judiciary in the same category as dictators and authoritarians who kill with impunity. Israel went to war in response to the Hamas attack of October the 7th, which left 1,200 Israelis dead and another 250 taken hostage, around 100 of whom still remain captive. The ICC's arrest warrant for one of the authors of that massacre, Hamas leader Mohammed Deif, who was probably killed in an Israeli airstrike months ago, looks more like false equivalence than genuine balance. So they're basically saying, because Israel suffered a terrorist attack, then they can't possibly be guilty of war crimes. Now, if you're saying, because something happened before that was bad, then anything they do afterwards is completely excused. Obviously, you can say the same thing about what happened on October the 7th, because lots of bad shit preceded that. Now, I'm not arguing that, but that's the logical conclusion of this argument, I think, from the Washington Post. And then this is what I think is the most bizarre argument from the Washington Post, right? From the editorial board, they say, President-elect Donald Trump in his first term took a hostile stance towards the ICC. Mr. Trump imposed travel sanctions against ICC prosecutors and staff, which President Joe Biden lifted. The ill-considered arrest warrants against Israel only give Mr. Trump a new reason to halt American cooperation with the court at a time when it's needed for Russia, Sudan, Myanmar, and conflicts elsewhere that atrocities are being committed with impunity and the victims have no other recourse. So this is really trying to have your cake and eat it. Right? The United States has not signed up to the Treaty of Rome. Right? It is not a member of the ICC. And it is not just a sort of passive bystander. They literally have a piece of legislation called the Hague Act, which means that if the ICC were to try and indict an American, they can invade the Hague. Right? So this is not a good faith partner of the ICC. And now the Washington Post, so probably sort of their second most important newspaper after the New York Times, is saying, look, we wouldn't join you anyway. And by the way, our new president already hates you. But this makes it even more likely that he's going to hate you. So you probably shouldn't do it because a guy who already hates you and had, only ever sort of ill will towards you might feel even worse about you. Ash, I suppose, you can comment on the Israeli lawyer as well, but this logic, which is sort of, we're not going to join you, but you also need to do exactly what we want you to do, otherwise we'll hate you even more. It's such a sort of strange piece of argumentation.
Well, it's not really a strange piece of argumentation. It's confirmation of what lots of international relations scholars and anti-imperialists have thought for a long time, which is that the institutions of international law aren't really about creating a universal framework by which all governments, all states, all combatants are held. It's about reinforcing and upholding American hegemony, right? So that's what lots of academics, lots of activists, lots of campaigners, a fair few politicians in the global south, that's what they've been saying for decades. And what the Washington Post have come along and said is, yes, it is precisely that. Nothing wrong with it. Well done on being so insightful. That's exactly what it's for. And of course, there are huge dangers with that. And of course, there are huge dangers of the Washington Post and America more generally being so flagrant in saying that in terms of wanting to hold whether it's Russia or combatants in Sudan. Of course, it's got a hugely degrading impact on the integrity of the ICC, if that's what America says. But ultimately, America doesn't care about the integrity of the ICC as an institution. They care about it as a vehicle for its own interests. I think, when I was looking at that Washington Post stand first, Michael, I was just like, yes, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, that's for the bad races. It's only for the bad races. The point of being one of the good races is you don't have to go to International Criminal Court. For the representative from, I believe it was UK Lawyers for Israel, correct me if I'm wrong. This idea of, it's an anti-Semitic blood libel. The point about blood libel was that it wasn't true. The point of blood libel was that it was a disgusting lie that was made up in order to justify pogroms and religious persecution of Jewish people. The point about blood libels was that they weren't true. I think it's increasingly transparent that, what it seems to me that, these individuals are really asking for is that, on account of Jewish people having historically been victims of persecution and, one of the worst genocides in human history, that the state of Israel gets to carry out war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and possibly a genocide on behalf of those people, right? That seems to me to be the argument. And if someone were to say that out loud, it would be disgusting, right? It would be morally abominable. And so that's why no one can say it openly. What's interesting to me is that, the early Zionists, as I've talked about before, they were a lot more, upfront about the violence that was needed to uphold, Israel as a settler colonial project. Whereas instead what you have here is this like, I am just a small bean. Just let me do my war crimes in peace. I think it's beneath contempt.
Thank you so much, Ash, for joining me this evening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to go snort a good old line of uncut lemsip.
Thank you, everyone, for watching tonight. Come back tomorrow for another show from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.